Today's message, if I had to give you a heading, will be Friends Forever. Now, you know, friends are very important, and I've had a lot of friends through my life, and one of them in particular was such a good friend that when he died, I felt my heart broke. I was very sad. I prayed to Jesus, please let him come alive again. I really miss him. We used to have lots of nice discussions. In actual fact, one trip we went together, we went for about 8 hours, all the way from Durban right up to near the Kruger Park. Do you know where the Kruger Park is? You don't, but it's a far away. It's about an 8-hour drive in a car. And the memory I have of him is he was a big man. Big in stature, but also big in size. You know, he ate quite a bit. And I remember he was in the van with me, and he had packed, you don't get that nowadays, but he had packed meals for the road. It was like a picnic basket. And there was all kinds of things in there. Savory pies, sweet stuff. It was a big packet. And he said to me, Billy, I hope you don't mind, but I brought us some padkos. And I was very excited because it made me think of when I was young and how our parents would always, when we traveled long distances, they would pack in all kinds of things. We would stop along the road by like a picnic spot, and then we would pull out and eat, and those were the nice times. But we were traveling, and it was a long time, and finally he said to me, Billy, don't you think it's time for us to have a little bit of these snacks that we've got in the car? So I said, of course, I think it's time. And opened that lid, and when I saw what was inside there, my mouth started to water, and the spit came down the side. I was so, whoa, I looked down, and man, am I going to enjoy myself today? But I was talking, you know, when you talk, you can't eat. And I was talking a lot to him that day because he was trapped. He couldn't climb out of the vehicle. He was trapped for 8 hours in my car. I could talk to him about everything. And we were talking about very important things. And I put my hand down to get, and I looked down, and there was 2 or 3 pieces left. And I looked at him, and he said to me, I left something for you, okay? And I knew, I put my hand down on the ground quite quickly. And that is a memory I have of him. Lovely memory. You know, when we used to eat, we would sit around a table. I don't know if any of you know people like this, but some people just know how to eat. You know, when they eat, you actually feel like eating. You know, they will take, if there's a little bit of gravy left, they will take a piece of bread and they will, you know, do that with the plates. And they would actually clean the plates so you didn't have to wait for them. They would go and then he would pop it into his mouth. And I can see Jason's drooling already. And he would pop it into his mouth and he would, you know, just make me, I was really good. He had that kind of effect on me. He was that kind of person that just loved life. He liked the idea that God gave him taste buds because he loved tasting sweet things and sour things. He just loved it. His eyes looked at all the beauty of God. He smelled the flowers. He was one that reminded me how important it is to be. And then one day, just after he had had a time with Jesus, they called it prayer meeting. He had a cell meeting at his home where they were talking about Jesus. At about 12 o'clock that night, I got a phone call from his mother saying to me that he's gone. I said, what do you mean he's gone? She She said, "Who's this guy?" And I was very sad. And I thought, when am I going to get another friend like that? But then I read the story about Jonah. And that's the story I want to tell you today. Because friends, especially good friends, you want them to be friends forever. Isn't that true? Even though we might be separated here, one day we will be together again, forever. And I'm going to look for him, because I want to sit near him and watch him eat as I eat. Because he will just make me hungry all over. So I want you to go with me to the story of David and Jonathan. Now, a lot of people distort this beautiful story about David and Jonathan. But they were really good friends. In actual fact, David served Jonathan's father. Jonathan's father was a king. A very important king. In actual fact, he was the first king of Israel. And he wasn't small. In actual fact, he stood head and shoulders above everybody else. That's why they chose him. He was such a good-looking, handsome king. David was a little red-haired boy, short in stature, but he could sing. He had a voice that could sing. And Saul had a son, and his son's name was Jonathan. And while David served in Saul's palace, he got to know Jonathan. And they became very good friends. But then things started to go wrong in the palace. King Saul was very jealous. He didn't like the idea that David was so loved by the people. He was envious. And so on one occasion when David was actually singing to him, he took his javelin. You know what a javelin is? It's like a spear. You know what a spear is? It's like a pole with a sharp edge. And he had this spear that only he could handle, and he picked up the spear in a moment of anger, and he threw it at David. And David moved out of the way, and the spear hit the wall behind him. And then David fled. Because he knew up to that point, Saul had managed to control himself. But now Saul was dangerous. And so David fled. But one day, Jonathan was missing David a lot, and David was missing Jonathan. And there was a big age difference. You know that they weren't the same age.
Jonathan
Was much older than David was. In actual fact, if it was like a real family, then
Jonathan
would have been the older brother. He would have been a difference in age maybe of about 15 years. Maybe even more. So he was like an
younger brother.
and he was missing Jonathan. So one day they made a decision that they're going to meet. And so they got together secretly so that Saul wouldn't know about it. And when they met one another, they were talking, and they had made a pact, an agreement, like we just read there. The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever, that we will always respect and love one another. We will be friends forever, even though we will be separated. We will be friends forever. But then David said, I can't go back to the palace. Jonathan said, why? He said, your dad, the king, he doesn't like me anymore. Jonathan said, that's not true. My father likes you. He often talks about you. So David said, well, I'm not sure, but can you find out for me? So Jonathan said, okay, you'll find out. And the agreement was that he was going to ask his father a few questions. And one day, as they were eating, David wasn't at the table like he always had been there for a while. And Saul looked over where David usually sits. Now, normally, I want you to remember this. The people who sit at the table of the king are usually recognized as family. So in actual fact, David wasn't just somebody that was a stranger. The fact that he sat at the table meant that Saul looked at him as a son, as a family member. Very important to understand. Because that's going to play a role later. The people who sit at the table are people who are family, regarded as family by the king. And we are counseled clearly, dear friends, one day we're all going to sit at the king's table in heaven. Not as strangers, but as sons and daughters of God, at a table. But anyway, so they had this agreement, and Saul was looking, and he noticed that David's chair was empty for a few days already. And one day he turned to Jonathan, and he said to Jonathan, where is David? Oh no, David's gone and he's doing this and gone. And he was making excuses for David because he wasn't quite sure what was going on. But one day, King Saul looked over to where David's seat was empty. And he asked again, Jonathan, where is David? And he started to make an excuse, and then the king got up and he was just angry. And there Jonathan saw that his father was going to do harm to his best friend. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how torn Jonathan was? He loved his father, but he also loved David. There is a book that is written. It is written by King Solomon, who was the son of David. And Solomon starts off in the book of Proverbs by writing certain things. But I want you to notice who he addresses the Proverbs to. And all the boys here, and girls really, so please don't feel that you are left out. But Solomon speaks, and he starts off by saying in verse 8 of Proverbs chapter 1, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Did you hear that, children? What must you do? You must listen to the instruction, the counsel of your father, but you must never forget the teachings that your mother gives you. Very important to listen to your parents. Will you remember to do that? Okay, you must listen to your parents. Now, one of the things that Proverbs or Solomon was trying to teach was the importance of choosing friends wisely. So this is a little bit of something I want you to think of. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse 26, Solomon says, the righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. So what does it mean? Can any of you tell me what it means? It means when you choose somebody to be your friend, you must choose somebody who is a righteous person, a person who loves God. That's the first person that you must choose to be your friend. They must love Jesus. Okay, that's the first thing. Then Proverbs says, the reason why it's so important that you choose your friends carefully, because he says in Proverbs 27 verse 17, iron sharpens iron. Do you know what that means? It means again that if your friend does something and it's a good thing, it will actually help you to be good. But it can also be the opposite. That if your friend does something horrible and he gets you to do something horrible, then you are sharpened in a bad way. You are sharpened to do bad. Now let me explain that. I had another friend. His name was Lionel. We actually did such a lot of things together. We used to get on our bicycles and we would go, you know what bicycles are, right? And we would go into the veldt, field, bush, and then we would hunt. We become these hunters. And we were friends for a long time. But one day we went to town. And while we were in the shop, this friend of mine went and he looked, and there he saw a leather wallet. Now, during that time, wallets were really very, fancy, leather wallet. You were a man. Anyway, he was looking at his wallet and as he picked it up, at that time, it was something like 15 rand, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that was like a whole year's pay. And he picked it up and he looked and said, wow, it would be nice to have this wallet. Now, I didn't know this thing about Lionel, but there was a bad thing in it. I'd never seen it until that day. He picked it up, put it down, and he looked over and he said, immediately I knew there's something mischievous going on here. So I came to him and he said, why don't you just steal? Steal. I looked at him. What? He says, oh, come on, you take one, I'll take one. Is that a good piece of iron? Is it sharpening me well? One thing about me, whenever I was about to do something bad, my face would glow like a red bottle. I would just get all hot and flustered, and people would know that I'm up to mischief. But I looked at him and I said, no. And I walked away and I went and I stood quite far away from him. But I could see, put his hand down, took the wallet, hid it away. I was whistling, picked up something, said, okay, I'll buy this. It was cheap, 50 cents. Walked back to the counter, and I'm glowing, but I don't know what to do. You see, he was a sharp eye than me. Instead of me influencing him, he was influencing me. But luckily I didn't do what he did. But as we went through, the teller said, ding, is that all you have? Yes, he said, that's what I have. And I'm like, I'm not saying anything. And as we walked out, he said, see. And then we got to the door. And as we got to the door, a man came and tapped him on the shoulder. And he said to him, would you please come with me? I knew that caught him. The sad part about this story is that's when we stop being friends. It just stopped that day. Just like that. Because I couldn't be friends with him and he was angry with me. Now his parents, they love me very much. And when I met them, they said to me, why didn't you stop? I just couldn't answer. And I was so disappointed. So remember, iron sharpens iron. Then Proverbs, King Solomon says, what is important, he says, walk with the wise and become wise. So when you choose friends, choose them carefully. They must be good irons. They must be wise. They must love God. Then he says that sometimes when you have to tell a friend something that they're doing wrong and they don't like you for that, Solomon says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. But an enemy, even though he kisses you on the cheek, like Judas did with Jesus, can never be trusted. So, what is the important thing here? You have to choose your friends carefully, especially if you want them to be friends forever. So, here we have the story of David. David suspects that Saul hates him. And Jonathan says, no, it's not true, but finally they agree on a sign. Find out from your dad, and Jonathan finds out Saul doesn't like him. So listen to what happens. This was what they had planned. It says in verse 35 of 1 Samuel chapter 20, in the morning, Jonathan went out to the field because you see, he didn't want his dad to know that him and David had been talking. So he went out to the field for his meeting with David, but his father didn't know it. He took a little boy with him. And then he went out and Jonathan took his bow and his arrow. You know what a bow and arrow is. Do you know what a bow and arrow is? So he took his bow and he put an arrow in it and he shot the arrow. Now guess where David was? David was hiding in the field. But nobody knew except Jonathan. Then Jonathan turned to the boy and he said, run, find my arrow. And as he was running to find the arrow, Jonathan cried out loud to the boy as if he was talking to the boy. But who was he really talking to? To David. But the little boy didn't know. And he said, isn't the arrow beyond you? Now immediately David knew that when Jonathan said that, it means that David was in trouble. That his father was planning to kill him. And he shouted further, hurry! Go quickly! Don't stop! What was he telling David? Hurry! Quickly! Don't stop. Now can you imagine that? This was going to be the last time that him and Jonathan would actually meet in living form. The boy picked up the arrow and returned back to Jonathan. Jonathan looked at him. The boy knew nothing about what was going on. And he said to him, please take my bow and arrows and go back to the house. I'll get you. Verse 41 says, after the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times. So he came to Jonathan. Why was he doing that? Because rightfully Jonathan was to be the next king. So he was showing to Jonathan great respect. But as they got to one another, they kissed one another. And then they cried, wept terribly. And the Bible tells me that David wept the most. In that sad, such a sad story. They leave and they never meet again. But that's not the end of the story. There's a beautiful part. There's a young man that very few people ever really talk about. Because it's difficult to talk about this kind of young man. You see, this young man was Jonathan's son. And Jonathan's son was Mephibosheth. Now, if you go and look up the word Mephibosheth, it means one who destroys shame. Now, you might think, oh, that's an interesting name, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. It's hard to say. Mephibosheth. Go, say it. Say it with me. Mephibosheth. Okay. Say it. Mephibosheth. Okay, we will say it. Means one who destroys shame. Now you might wonder, what is wrong with Mephibosheth? Why would he destroy shame? That's interesting. One day he was fleeing, and as he fled with his caregiver, she dropped him. And in the process of dropping him, he hurt his ankles, that he could never walk again. He was lame in his ankles. And that is what it meant. But yet his name meant one who destroys shame. And yet so many times we are shameful when we have something like it. We feel embarrassed, we hide away and all of that. No, you don't have to hide away. But for a long time, the son of Jonathan, nobody even heard about him. Nobody even knew about him. But then one day we have this incredible story where David is thinking, and he's by a place where there's a lot of descendants of Saul, and he turns around and he asks in 2 Samuel chapter 9, he says, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to which I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Isn't that incredible? So many years later, David hadn't forgotten the love that he had for Jonathan. Jonathan was dead by now. And he said, I want to show how much I love Jonathan. Isn't there anybody around that's still alive? Yeah, there is a son. Jonathan had a son, but he's a bit, I don't know how to explain this. But he's kind of had a bad accident. David said, really? Bring him to me. So they bring Mephibosheth into his presence. A cripple. David looks at him and he hugs him and he says to him, are you really Jonathan's son? He said, it is as you said, Lord. Because you see, David was a very important person by now. It is. It's as you said, I am Jonathan's son. David looked at him and said, from now on, you will eat at my table. You will be my son. Now, dear friends, I want you to listen to this. If you've been maimed by life in some way and people disregard you and look funnily at you, you will sit at the king's table. Because that was Jesus' promise. I want them to be with me where I am. And David was a man after God's own heart, and he did exactly what God knew. And he said to Mephibosheth, you will from now on eat with me at my table right until the day I die. You will be my son. And then he turns to the others, the people who were looking after him, and he said to them, from now on, all his property, everything that belonged to Saul will be given back to him. He will be the owner of all of that property. And you people must care for it, and you must look after it. Mephibosheth. Forever you will be servants to him. But he will eat in my house. And it made me think again. how that God would make your enemies his footstool. Isn't it wonderful to know that we can do something that can change a life? We can choose our friends carefully. But I want you to remember this. There's a beautiful chorus that goes, I have a friend so precious, so very dear to me. You know that song? Let's sing that one instead of the one I had planned. So get that one, Jackie, and then Diane, come to the front. We're going to sing that song. And then as we sing it, I want you to remember that one thing about friends, they don't only have to be friends here. They can be your friends forward. And if you're going to make only one friend on planet Earth, let Jesus be your friend. Will you do that? Will you choose Jesus to be your friend? Because he is a good iron to be sharpened by. He is a righteous person. He loves his Father. And he will always tell you when you're doing something wrong, but when he tells you, you weep as he tells you. He is a good friend to have.